I was talking about vaccinations against COVID. And it was 1 and 2 vaccinations and then a booster shot and who knows, anyway, whatever it is. I told you that I have to teach. Having to teach means I have to be able to be at various locations around the world. And I said that if the only way to, and it wasn't the case and it isn't the case at the moment, I said, but if, for instance, the ridiculous totalitarian mandates extend to air travel, then I'll probably just have to go along and get vaccinated because I need to be able to travel on a plane. And now I'm not sure that that is true. I'm not sure that is right. Because I am now seeing that this governmental obsession with vaccination is now, it's political. It's not health. It's not science. It is pure exercise of power. Now, exercising power and inflicting your strength over other people is something that small human beings do. It's a petty activity. It's something that makes little people feel big. And in many countries, particularly countries that were sort of emerging into modernity, there were periods where their government bureaucrats and clerks were like that. They just, you could see they took visible and obvious delight in imposing their power over everyone who was at their mercy. And I do believe that starting already a while back, but accelerating dramatically over the last few years, the tendency to distinguish between those who have power and those who are under the power has become accentuated, and that at almost every level, from the President of the United States all the way to the person serving you in the post office, the tendency is to exert power. The tendency is to show your power. I see it a lot in the cabin crew on airplanes today. They actually enjoy snarling at passengers about wearing the mask. This is a sad reality, but it is very much where we're at. And so I want to tell you what the basic facts are that have changed my mind. You all made me look into it and think about it very carefully. It was your letters and your arguments, and in some cases, your gently expressed disappointment in me and what I said. And so I'm taking that back and telling you I'm not going down without a fight, and that I am going to resist this as long as possible. I do not want to have it. I don't believe I need it. And I know what many of you say, well, the science says. I mean, I've heard this already. I've heard it a lot. The science says the vaccines are effective. So let me tell you my facts. Now, if you feel that anything I'm about to tell you is not a fact and is incorrect, please correct me, but not just with vituperative essays, but with actual information. Let me tell you what I am now absolutely persuaded of. Number one, the survival rate of COVID is over 99%. And by the way, at the beginning, in April 2020, I remember, and I found government medical experts to say the vast majority of the population are not in any danger from COVID. And so the infection fatality rate of COVID is about 0.04%. That means the inverse of that, the survival rate, is 99.5%. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is that I completely dismiss the lie that COVID has killed, the figure they're now using is 700,000 Americans. I believe that's a lie. I told you that already about a year ago, a little more than a year ago. I told you because a very brave researcher whose career has been severely damaged. She was a researcher at Johns Hopkins University, and she pointed out that there are no excess rates of death. If there's one thing that America keeps good records on, it's medicine. We know average weights and heights of men and women of different ages because every time you go to the doctor, all of that gets recorded. And that data is available, not necessarily with your name and your details attached to it, but in terms of statistical data, we know it. And we know what the death rate is in America, and we know how it grows as America's population grows. It grows predictably as well. I don't have to tell you that if between 2020 and 2021 there were 700,000 COVID deaths, we would know it. For one thing, coffin manufacturers and funeral parlors and crematorium would have that information. It's, my friends, it is not there. I saw information that said 2020 was the deadliest year in the United Kingdom since World War II. But this is misleading because it ignores the huge, massive increase in population since that time. If you really want to study the mortality rates, if you really want to look into whether COVID has killed people, then the correct statistical measure, of which, by the way, we've got all the numbers, is something we call age standardized mortality rate, the age standardized mortality rate. And when you look at that, which is a very reliable measure of deaths, 2020 isn't even the worst year for mortality since 2000. In fact, if you go back to 1943, there are only 9 years that have been better than 2020. There were no excess deaths in 2020. In the United States, the age standardized mortality rate for 2020 is the same as it was in 2004. In other words, nothing's changed. So please be aware. I'm sure some of you are probably going frantic. How dare I say there are no COVID deaths? You know of people who died of COVID. Yeah, and you also know of the motorcyclist who died in a motorcycle accident at 24 years old with a fractured skull and whose death was attributed to COVID. And I spoke about this on the show in 2020, pointing out that the CDC actually advised medical staff around the country that if there is any evidence of the presence of COVID when somebody dies, the death should be attributed to COVID. I know some of you are saying to yourselves, come on, why would anybody do that? And I intend telling you and explaining that as well. But the bottom line is I am absolutely convinced after studying the correct statistics, in other words, looking not just at deaths, but age standardized mortality rate, which is the statistical measure that was developed many, many, many years ago for measuring precisely this, which is, are there any abnormal changes to what would be seen as a normal death rate? So that leaves us without any doubt whatsoever that COVID death counts are artificially inflated. And it's not just the United Kingdom, the United States, but countries around the world are all defining a COVID death, as I'm quoting now from the medical information. A COVID death is a death by any cause within 30 or 60 days of a positive COVID test. Some countries 30, some countries 60. So in other words, if somebody dies and they had a COVID test 3 weeks ago, but they died because of a fall off a roof, that gets listed as a COVID death. And by the way, this I have seen health officials in Italy, Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, Northern Ireland, as well as others, all acknowledge that this practice is how they do it. So I'm not telling you sort of underground information. This isn't from the dark web. Countries say, yeah, that's what we do. I mean, if you think about it, right, if you remove all distinctions between dying of COVID and dying of something else after testing positive for COVID, naturally it's going to lead to massive overcounting of COVID deaths. The fact is that in 2020 already, many pathologists in Britain and the United States were warning of this substantial overestimate. Now, I know you're thinking, why would they do that? I'll tell you still. The next fact, these are the reasons why I object strenuously to the vaccine mandate. The next fact I want to tell you is, and again, you might say, well, you're wrong. I'm telling you that I've researched and I'm satisfied for my life and for me. Everything I'm telling you are things I absolutely 100% am convinced are true and factual. The vast majority of COVID deaths in all countries have serious comorbidities. When this all started in March 2020, the Italian government published statistics showing that 99.2% of their, quote, COVID deaths had at least one serious comorbidity. These include cancer, heart disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, kidney failure, diabetes, and many others. Over 50% of COVID deaths had 3 or more serious pre-existing conditions, which brings us to the age of COVID deaths. The average age of COVID deaths in the countries I'm researching, United Kingdom, United States, Italy, Germany, Switzerland, Canada, Australia. Did I say United States? Yeah. The average age of COVID deaths, what do you think it is? You want to take a guess? I'll give you 5 seconds. It's 82.5 years old. Do you know what the life expectancy in all of these countries is? 79 years old is the average life expectancy. So in other words, the average age of a COVID death in all of these countries I'm talking about, United Kingdom, America, Italy, Germany, Switzerland, Canada, Israel, 82.5 years old is the average age of people who die of COVID. And so no big surprise that there are comorbidities, right? It's kind of normal for 82-year-old people to have various problems. Does this sound like a real epidemic of frightening proportions? Not to me. The fact is that when the Spanish flu early in the 20th century came to America, it caused a 30% drop in life expectancy. That's serious. That was terrible. I've read stuff about that period of it's awful, just absolutely horrifying. COVID has caused zero drop in life expectancy in the year and a half, 2 years that's been going on. So this is really, really important. Let me tell you two more things. One is hospitals were never unusually overburdened. The whole argument for lockdowns was flattening the curve. Do you remember all of that? Because we're going to overwhelm the hospitals and we need to have more ventilators. We need every factory in the country to start building more. We never reached any of these predictions. Nothing. Never happened. And finally, I ought to tell you one more thing, and that is the PCR test that everyone takes, right? If you've had this thing stuck up your nose, you took a PCR test. The PCR tests are not designed to diagnose illness. They're designed to show up COVID. It has to do with what's called the cycles. Essentially, PCR tests are run in cycles. The number of cycles you use to get the result is known as your cycle threshold. Think of a cycle as searching for your car keys in your living room. If you do a quick 30-second sweep of your living room, you probably don't find the car keys. But if you do it again and again and again and again, you'll eventually find the car keys. PCR tests are run like 30, 40 and more cycles. And the truth is that any test with a cycle threshold above 35 is too sensitive. It's crazy. You will find a COVID virus in a can of motor oil if you're going to run it at 40 cycles. Some labs in the US are running as high as 45 cycles. And the National Institute of Health in America sets the standard operating procedure for PCR tests. They set the limit at 40 cycles. And so on that basis, the majority of PCR test results are at the very best questionable. So the World Health Organization, by the way, of which I'm no fan, I found a briefing memo on the PCR process, on the test process, that the WHO put out, instructing labs to be very wary of high CT values, high cycle values, causing false positive results. I'm quoting now from the World Health Organization document. When specimens return a high CT value, meaning showing the virus, it means that many cycles were required to detect the virus. In some circumstances, the distinction between background noise and artificial presence of the target virus is difficult to ascertain. They released another memo. Asymptomatic positive PCR tests should be retested because they might be false positives. So I'm sorry. For these and many other facts that I don't want to take more time on, I am absolutely convinced that the lockdowns were horrible. They were a dreadful mistake. I think that masks are completely unnecessary and that the COVID vaccine is an attempt to get the populace more accustomed to obeying orders. I really do. I really think that's what it is. But I did say that I would tell you, why is it? I mean, who on earth would have any interest in making the COVID epidemic worse than it really is? I mean, it would appear, according to the facts that I have satisfied myself on, this just was not anything even approaching what we had at the beginning of the 20th century with the flu. Not even remotely close. And that, and there are other concerns, by the way. One of my concerns is, and here I'm not speaking factually, I don't know this clearly, but I am worried that the vaccine, based as it is on the kind of technology it uses, could stop my body from doing its regular antibody production. Right? I'm not knowledgeable about that, but I am looking into it. But why? Who has any interest in making this a worse thing than it is? Well, you'll remember that one of the doctrines of leftism is never let a crisis go to waste. Because if your goal is expanding government power, if that's your goal, totalitarianism is what you seek, then a crisis is always a wonderful opportunity to do so. Very, very worth doing. So who is it who could possibly have any interest? Let me explain. Let us say that you're a dishonest employee and you've been working for a company and you've got yourself into the habit of stealing from the till. And you know it's only a matter of time before you're going to be caught. It always happens. Eventually there's an audit, eventually somebody sees you, eventually there's an accounting, and they realize that somebody's skimming money out of the cash register. And you've been doing it for a long time because it's very easy to become addicted to it. You suddenly are getting money for nothing. and originally you were just borrowing from the cash register from your boss. You were going to pay it back, but you weren't able to pay it back. You took a little bit more, and now it's a big sum of money that you have taken. Would you not love to have a big fire in the company that destroyed all the inventory and destroyed all the records? Wouldn't that be like the best thing for you? That's right. Imagine you work on a Carnival cruise line. Let's say you're the captain or a first officer on a Carnival cruise line, and you've been persuading passengers to put their jewelry and their valuables in the safe, and you meanwhile have been keeping it, and you've been handing it off to a collaborator at every port at which you stop, and you've been building up quite a nest egg. But the day of reckoning is going to have to come, because when the cruise ends, all the passengers who you persuaded to give you their valuables to place in the ship's safe, they're going to ask for it back. And so you're living in dread. Wouldn't you love for the ship to sink and go down? You'd love for that to happen. It solves your problems. I wonder if you see where I'm going with this. One of the things that happened during the Stalinist era was they used to speak of famines. Oh, there's another terrible famine. There's no rain. This is happening. That's happening. Why do you think they did that? Well, because socialism causes people to starve. Socialism failed to transport food from the farms to the city because socialism wanted to do away with the middleman. Everything belongs to the people. Well, the trouble is that millions of people from Moscow to Vladivostok were not able to go pick food in the field, and they used to depend on a marketplace. And communism killed all that. And so obviously Stalin created famines, because that way blame can be deflected from the genuine culprit. My friends, if you want to know why governments around the world have loved this epidemic and who've done everything they can, as you can see, inflating the numbers of the dead beyond anything that's even reasonable. And why are they doing that? Because there are a lot of unpaid government promises that have been made. And the chickens were going to come home to roost. And eventually it was going to become clear that the regulatory environment in America was stifling industry, and that the union organization that had been promoted and generated and built by the Democratic Party in America, that was causing companies to move production out of the United States of America. All of this, in due course, it was going to come home to roost, and eventually fingers were going to be pointed at the guilty parties. And now the best thing on earth happened: a COVID epidemic. And that's why I'm sure you've noticed, wherever you live in the world, and whatever it is you're trying to do, you call up a company that's supposed to supply you with something. You try and get some information from the government. You try and get something from the post office. For heaven's sake, people have been trying to get the government to release information on the Kennedy assassination in 1963, and nothing happens, and the blame is due to COVID. How many times have you seen that phrase, due to COVID? Right? All of a sudden now you go to an American hotel and there's no room service. There is no fresh towels. COVID. It's all due to COVID. But what do you think this is doing to the bottom line of hotel and the hospitality industry? It's pretty good. COVID has been an absolute bonanza. And all you have to do is look at the financial performance figures of many, many, many American companies. 2020 was one of the best years many of them had. Yeah, well, obviously. And so that really is what it is that is going on here. And so I apologize for having told you a few weeks back that if push came to shove to get on a plane, I would participate in the vaccination program. I've changed my mind on that. And I thank you all for helping me regain a correct perspective on this.